Now, I'm going to try to just illustrate something here. I'm going to put 2 marks here, and what this mark represents in my thinking is a line from eternity to eternity. Now, what do these 2 points represent? They represent 2 points in the history of the universe when everything is right. At these 2 points, everybody knows the truth about God. Back in eternity past, everybody knows that this God is a God of love. They know he's an amazing person, and all he is love. This God designed us to be his friends. And there never was anything else to it. God did not design you to be a little tool that he's going to use to try to glorify his name. He didn't design you to be a little tool to use it to promote his rules or whatever. He designed you and he created you because he loved you. And like a parent wants children, he wanted you to be his children so he could be happy and you could be happy. And everybody knew this at the beginning. And at the end, everybody will know it again. Because the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It's going to happen the second time. But in between is where the disaster happened. And the problem is that in that middle disaster, much of the universe and definitely most of planet Earth has not been able to get out of the box of what happened in that disaster. Somewhere in the system, God set up a system that the Bible refers to as the system of the law. All right? And this system, understanding the system, is where we have a problem because many people don't have a clue what this system was about. Let me go back to the Bible because I want to read a couple of things that it says about the law. First of all, John 1 and verse 17, a remarkable verse here that I'm sure most of us, if we ever noticed it, we bypassed it because it's not easy to understand. It says in verse 17, John 1 and verse 17, for the law was given by Moses. Right away you say, that's not true. God gave the law. But the scripture says, John says the law was given by Moses. But grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. And the implication is that what Moses brought was not grace and truth. Am I justified in coming to that conclusion? He's setting the 2 things in contrast, right? What Moses brought and what Jesus Christ brought. And he's saying what Moses brought, it was not grace and truth, because grace and truth arrived when Jesus Christ arrived. What do we then make of the law that Moses gave? What we conclude is that the law that Moses gave, in some sense, it was not grace and it was not truth. But I think the point he's making is that the law represents what God was able to do through Moses. The law represents what God could do through a human being. What God did through Moses was give a revelation of himself that was limited, that was prone to be misunderstood, that was partial and imperfect. That's what God could do through Moses. But it was always God's plan to give us grace and truth. But Moses could not bring grace and truth. It required the Son of God to bring the system of grace and reality. I say truth. The word truth here means reality. And what this tells me is that the system of the law was not something that God intended to be permanent or that he intended to be the end of the story. We'll read a few more verses that bring this out more clearly. Look at Matthew 19 and verse 8. This is a verse that it talks about Moses' instruction that a man should divorce his wife. In verse 7 it says, they say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? He said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts. suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. You know why this is very interesting to me? Because at this point, they're asking Jesus about a command that God gave. Was it Moses who gave the rule that a man could divorce his wife? Was it Moses? It was God who told Moses what to say. Isn't that right? It was God who gave the rule. And so they're asking, all right, God says a man can give his wife a writing of divorcement and put her away. How dare you be contradicting Moses? And what does Jesus say? He does not say, listen, the Bible didn't say that. He does not say, well, you see, what it really means, you have to look at the Hebrew and you have to understand the Hebrew word and what it implies. No, he doesn't do this. He comes straight out and says, God did give this rule, but this rule is not God's will. What? God gave a rule that was not his will? That gives you a clue as to what was going on under the system of the law. Jesus says God set up this particular rule, and it applies many places in the law. He's saying God gave this particular rule because the state of you people, it was the best God could do for you. Because of the state of your heart, God put something in place that was not according to his will. And I'm making that point because many people don't understand that a lot of what happened under the law, it was not God's ultimate will. God did not want it that way. God didn't want people to have to die because they broke the Sabbath. There are many things God put in place because the law was supposed to be a teaching system. And in order for the lessons to be taught effectively, God had to put things in place that he never wanted to be that way. The law is not God's final word by any means. And when I say the law, I mean the system of the law. It's not God's final word. This is why John says, truth came by Jesus Christ, not by Moses. What does he mean by truth? Was the law the truth? Were the things that were said in the law true?
Yes.
Yes, but they were not real. There is another. You think that true, the converse is false. But in the Bible, in this context, it's not true versus false. It's true versus representation. The lamb that they slaughtered, the lamb that you took when you committed a sin and you killed the lamb, was it true? It was truly a lamb. Was it truly the lamb that would take away sin? No. It was a representation. And the whole system of the law was a system of representations. It was not truth. Truth came by Jesus Christ. God's system of real things arrived with Jesus Christ, and the system of representations ended with Jesus Christ. One of the things I came to understand some time ago is that the law is the greatest parable in the Bible, the system of the law, the greatest parable. And I'll just pause a little and just talk a little bit about that because I want to make that point clear. The tool that God uses most is the tool of parables. If you look at the history of Jesus, the life of Jesus, he's always telling parables. But many people don't recognize that the greatest parable of all is the law. The law is not a parable that was told. It's a parable that was lived. It's like a movie or a play. You go to a play and you see here are two people in this play and they're in love. And here you see somebody get shot and he dies. You are watching this play or you're watching this movie. Do you think it is real? In the story, the person dies. In the story, these two people are in love. But when the play is over and you go around the back, there's the dead person very much alive. And these people are not really in love at all. So you understand when you're watching it that you are not taking the elements as truth. You are taking the lesson behind it as true. That's the way parables are. There are parables that were told. Jesus even told a parable that is clearly not the truth. About a rich man that died and went to hell, and a poor man that died and went to sit in Abraham's bosom. It's clearly not the truth. If you think that the story you are listening to, the elements of it are true, then I'm sorry, because you just don't understand the method that God is using. So you look at the point behind the story. And it's the same thing with the Old Testament. There are things that in the Old Testament that you can look at it and you can see it's not ultimate truth. It's representation. And one striking example that I like to use is the case of the death of Moses. Why was not Moses allowed to enter the promised land? Why did he have to die? The Bible says Moses was 120 years old. His eye was not dim. His natural force was not abated. He was stronger than a 20-year-old man inside here. He was strong, full of the vigor of life. He went up on the mountain and he died there. What happened to him? Got a sudden stroke. Got a heart attack. God put him to sleep. He had to die. Why? Because he sinned. What? One sin and he can't go in? But then the Bible teaches us that on the Mount of Transfiguration, lo and behold, who is there? Moses is there. But in the parable, what had to happen to him? He had to die in the parable. In the representational system, he had to die. Why? God was teaching something through the law. He was teaching that sin is associated with death. And when you are teaching a lesson, if you're a teacher, here's one thing you will learn. Those of you who are teachers, I used to be a school teacher for a while too. And what I learned is this. When you're teaching a lesson, when you're trying to teach a child something, the principles that you are trying to establish, you must be true to those principles. Don't break them or the child will be confused. Whatever lesson you are learning, be faithful in presenting the principles accurately or the child will become confused. When God is teaching that there's a relationship between sin and death, he has to stick to the rules. He can't break them. So Moses breaks God's commandment. On the border of the promised land, God says, speak to the rock. And Moses smites the rock. He disobeys God. He's not just somebody who has sinned. He is God. He is way up in the echelons of those who are important to God. He's God's number one representative on the earth. And he has just taught the people that it's not important to obey God. He has just taught the people that sin is not that critical. And if God could let anybody get away with it, he can't let Moses get away with it. Because Moses is the greatest representation of the system, of this teaching system. So he has to die. God has to be faithful to what he's trying to do. And Moses says, oh, please let me go over and see this goodly land and Lebanon. And his best friend says, I can't let you go over. He has to die. It's a parable. It's a teaching tool, and God has to be faithful to the system. But look here, as soon as he's dead, as soon as he can cool off, here comes Michael to raise him from the dead. And before they're even in the promised land, he is having a far greater experience than anybody else in the system could have had. And I'm one of those, I'm persuaded that when we come to the end of time, you're going to see people in the kingdom who died under the law, who even died under judgment. Maybe even Uzzah, okay? I can't speculate because I don't know the state of his heart, but maybe even people like Uzzah, a man who was trying to do what he thought was best to prevent the ark from being destroyed. God could not break the rule. He died. But in the world to come, I wouldn't be surprised if I see Uzzah happy and cheerful and very much alive and inheriting eternal life. So,